Alright, listen up. In the next 2 hours, I'm gonna tell you about some of the most disturbing killers to ever live. I'm talking about serial killers who were children to ones that were never caught. Alright, this first serial killer was so feared that there was witnesses that knew the identity of the killer but refused to expose him. Yeah, I'm not even kidding, and I'm talking about none other than the Doodler. This crazy notepad-wielding wacko haunted the gay community in San Francisco during the 1970s. Between 1974 and 1975, it was confirmed that the Doodler killed at least 6 men. Later, he was connected to even more kills, totaling up to 16 men. Now you're probably wondering, why was he called the Doodler? That's because he would sketch his victims out before killing them. And this whole story begins on January 27th, 1974. At 1:30 a.m., a call was made to San Francisco police, with the scared citizen on the line claiming that there was a dead body washed up on the shore of the beach. The cops rushed down to Ocean Beach when the waves uncovered the body of an older man that looked completely lifeless. The cops then dragged the body across the beach to, get a closer look. The body was later identified as Gerald Kavanaugh, a 49-year-old heavy-set man. And guys, the man was found with 17 stab wounds. Yeah, you heard me correctly. This man right here was stabbed 17 times. In the front of his body and even at the back, including stab wounds in his hand. Which probably meant that Gerald tried to fight off his killer before, he was killed. The police, who were at the time confused by the brutality of the crime, didn't have any leads. But there was this though, a theory that Gerald was approached at one of the city's gay bars by a young black man, asking if Gerald wanted his portrait drawn by him. Then after, he was taken to the Ocean Beach because it was actually a common hookup place, which is when the dude pulled out a knife and repeatedly stabbed Gerald. Yeah, and guys, this was only the beginning of the Doodler's killing streak. June 25th, 1974, the body of Joseph J. Stevens, a 27-year-old entertainer, was discovered the following day near Spreckles Lake in Golden Gate Park by some random woman that was walking along. Joseph, or Jay, was stabbed 3 times. And it was also said that there was an excess amount of blood dripping from her nose and mouth. Yeah, and it was also said that the last time anyone saw Jay was at a nightclub in the Tenderloin district of the night of June 24th, 1974. Just a day before the woman found her, dead. Witnesses described seeing Stevens at the nightclub, but no one reported seeing her, which, by the way, is the pronouns that she went by because she was transgender, leave or even being in the company of anyone suspicious, or anyone at all, which makes this next part a little bit confusing. It was believed that Jay went to the lake with her killer after leaving the gay nightclub, and that's where she was stabbed to death. Here's something you may find interesting. According to reports, she only died shortly before being found, which means that someone could have saved this woman's life. Since both Gerald and Jay were killed in similar areas and lured in the same, it was enough for the police to establish a pattern and confidently say this was the work of a single killer. Now, this next victim was one who was forced to come out as gay to his wife and kids by the Doodler. Yeah, this is Klaus Christmann, a 31-year-old man from Germany. And on July 7th, 1974, his dead body was found fully clothed on Ocean Beach. That's the same place that Gerald Kavanaugh was found, by the way. But this time, Klaus's body was found with 15 stab wounds, and his throat was slashed wide open. Now, unlike the other victims, Klaus was married and had children. And remember, the MO for the Doodler was men that he could find at the gay bars or nightclubs. Yeah, I know what you're about to say, but this man was also found with the makeup tube in his pocket, meaning that he probably put on makeup before going out. This is not me hating, by the way, I'm just pointing out that the makeup provided the police with reasonable suspicion to believe that despite being married, this man still fit the victim profile. Anyways, after 3 kills, what do we know about this killer? He would meet his victims at gay bars or clubs, sketch them, and then lure them into a secluded areas, probably offering, then obviously kill them. Here's the part that will shock you. Ready? Listen to this. The police interviewed hundreds of people, but any surviving victim of the Doodler would not come forward. Because get this, they didn't want to be outed for being homosexual or being known as having intercourse with other men. Okay, I know this is a sensitive topic, but if you were the victim, would you willingly withhold information that could capture a mass serial killer just to hide your sexuality? Again, I repeat, I am not saying that what they did was wrong or right. I just simply want to know your opinion and comment what, you think in the comments. Anyways, as you can imagine, this made it even harder for the police to build a case against the doodler. And one of the most frustrating parts of the investigation is that the police actually had a suspect. Yeah, listen to this. They questioned a young man who fit the description given by the witnesses at the crime scenes. But without the actual victim's cooperations, they couldn't bring any charges against this guy. The police were trying to connect dots and find solid evidence, but all they knew was the killer was targeting gay men. But other than that, they knew nothing. Why did they have nothing? Well, that's because the doodler knew how to avoid leaving evidence behind on the crime scenes. I mean, seriously, there was no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses who could positively identify him. The police even considered that he may have some background in law enforcement or forensics, which would explain his ability to cover his tracks so well. Over the years, many stories were created about the doodler. There was this one theory that the doodler was a man who struggled with his own sexuality and taking his anger out on his victims. This would explain why he targeted gay men and why his attacks were so brutal. Another theory was that the doodler was a regular at the gay bars and nightclubs he hunted in, which made him a familiar face. This would explain how he was able to gain the trust of his victims and lure them into their deaths. But guys, because none of the victims came forward, the doodler was never caught. Keep in mind that these crimes were from 1975, so he could very much still be alive. And by the way, the only reason the police even knew about the doodles in the first place was from the witnesses' stories, who, by the way, never officially came forward. I guess you can call them sketchy. Nope, that was a bad joke. Next up, Bible John, a killer who tried to get in a woman's pants by using Bible verses before killing her. Yeah, this man haunted Glasgow, Scotland in the late 1960s. Between 1968 and 1969, he killed 3 women, all from the same dance hall known to locals as Barrowland Ballroom. Let's just get right into it. In 1968, Patricia Docker, a 25-year-old nurse, went out dancing one night at you guessed it, the Barrowland Ballroom, where she was later seen leaving the dance hall with some random guy, but her whole world was about to be turned upside down, as that night she never actually made it home. February 23rd, 1968, when the sun came up the next morning, a man was walking on his way to work when he found Patricia's body only yards, or for some of you weirdos watching this video, feet away from her home in Langside Place. Her body had evidence of extensive blunt force trauma to the face and head. Oh, and it was also believed that she was strangled to death with a belt. Yeah, you heard me correctly, with a belt. Only 1 year later, on August 16th, 1969, Jemima McDonald, a 31-year-old who, by the way, had 3 kids waiting at home for her, also went out dancing one night at Barrowland. And just like Patricia, she was last seen leaving the ballroom with another strange man. Or in this case, the same strange man. Are we starting to see a pattern here? Anyways, her body was found just a few days later in an old building, where she'd been found beaten, strangled, and assaulted in the, It was after this killing that the police noticed the pattern of the woman leaving the ballroom with the mysterious man, only to turn up, less alive than when they left. Now, this next victim was the closest the cops got to catching Mr. Bible John. The final victim was Helen Puttock, a 29-year-old woman who went out on October 31st, 1969. And oh, a spooky Halloween it was. She was last seen with her sister Jean and 2 men both named John, funny enough. After a night of dancing, drinking, flirting, and having fun, Helen decided to get into the back of an old yellow taxi with her sister and Bible John, who, by the way, found it proper foreplay etiquette to talk non-stop about the Bible. Nothing like some Bible study to get warmed up for the nasty, huh? I'm sorry, this is not the time to be cracking jokes. That's my bad. Anyways, in the taxi, the man would talk about how disgusting it was that married people would go to the dance hall, and spoke about all the adulterous women in there, while quoting something from the Bible, of course. When the taxi reached Helen's sister Jean's stop, she got out of the taxi, leaving Helen and Bible John in it. But Jean didn't know that this would be the last night that she would ever see her sister Helen alive. And guys, the next morning, Helen's body was found by a man walking his dog. She had, like the others, been assaulted, and strangled as well. Yeah, this guy definitely had a pattern. 3 women all killed after a night dancing, and the killer seemed to know exactly what he was doing because he left no clues behind. The police interviewed hundreds of people, put out a sketch, and even had undercover officers at the Barrowland Ballroom. The sketch was based on Jean's description, showing a tall, slim man with reddish hair, and in Scotland that really narrows things down. The police also wondered if the killer was actually a regular at the ballroom. Someone who knew the place well. The investigation hit many dead ends. One popular theory is that Bible John was Peter Tobin, a guy who was actually later convicted as a serial killer. Alright, it wasn't known at the time if Tobin was in Glasgow at the time of the murders. Although he does fit the description pretty well. I mean, look at this. But there's no concrete evidence linking him to the Bible John killings. So it just remains a theory. Meaning that this horn dog spitting Bible quotes before slaughtering innocent women could be watching this very video. Hell, he could even be subscribed. I mean, now that I mention it, you should probably join the 26,000 of us and hit that subscribe button. Now let's talk about the servant girl annihilator who between the years of 1884 and 1885 killed at least 8 people, 5 black women, 2 white women, and a man. Our story begins on December 30th, 1884, when Molly Smith, a young African-American servant, was sleeping in her cabin on the property of her employer when suddenly she was waken up by someone carrying a knife and an axe. She was stabbed multiple times in bed, before she was dragged outside where the assault with the axe continued until she was, dead. The following morning, her employer discovered the gruesome scene. Her head was split open, with bloodstains covering the grass around her dead body. The killer didn't stop there. No, of course not. I mean, do they ever? Over the next year, he claimed the lives of 7 more victims, all attacked in similar fashion. Axe wounds with more blood than you've ever seen in your whole damn life. But guys, get this. The killer would continue to chop up the bodies even after they were already dead. Like, hello? The police, in fact, were so baffled by this case. Despite extensive investigations and numerous arrests, they were still unable to identify the actual killer that night. They even tried to bring in a pair of freaking bloodhounds from Kentucky to track down the murderer. I thought that was kind of a cool side fact. Let's actually break down some of these other murders so you understand the sheer horror the servant girl annihilator inflicted on the city of Austin. After the death of Molly Smith, the next victim was Eliza Shelley, another African-American servant who was killed on May 7th, 1885. Shelley was found in her employer's home. Her head was cracked wide open by a rock, and her body was torn apart just like Smith's body was. I mean, it was clear that this was the same person behind both the murders. As the murderer killed more, he perfected his sick technique. Why am I saying that? Because these next murders get even more gruesome. Just a month later, on June 30th, 1885, Irene Cross, who, you guessed it, another African-American servant, was killed while she was in her home. She was slashed repeatedly with a knife, and the killer almost cut off her whole damn head. Hold on, like imagine being almost decapitated in your own goddamn house. Witnesses reported seeing a man fleeing the scene, but again, he was never caught. Let's fast forward to August 30th, 1885, where the killer struck again. This time trying to take the lives of 2 victims in one night. Because for some reason, I guess one body wasn't good enough for the night, or was he trying to beat a high score? Like, I don't know. Mary Ramey, an 11-year-old African-American girl, the daughter of another servant named Rebecca Ramey, was attacked in her home. Rebecca and her daughter were sleeping soundly on a peaceful Sunday morning, until out of nowhere, Rebecca was hit with a sandbag. Her skull was fractured, and she had a wound on the left side of her head from a sharp object. Her daughter was then dragged into a nearby house and assaulted, Her attacker drove an iron pin into both her ears, penetrating her brain. She lived for a short time after the police arrived, bleeding to death in the backyard. And guys, her mother was injured trying to protect her from the killer, but get this though, she actually survived. Yeah, imagine the horror of seeing your own daughter die right in front of you, and then having to live with that memory. Jesus. But I think the servant girl annihilator's next kills were even worse than that. Because instead of trying to kill 2 people, he tried to kill 4 people all at once in one room. Gracie Vance was living in the back of her employer's house in a small room with her boyfriend, when on the night of September 28, 1885, 2 girls came to visit her in the back, Lucinda Bobby and Patsy Gibson, for anyone wondering. Which now made a total of 4 people in the room when suddenly the killer bursted into the room. The killer turned to the boyfriend, Orange Washington, and struck him with the hatchet, splitting his head wide open. Then he used the axe and knocked the 2 girls unconscious. Gracie Vance was then hit and dragged out of the room through the window, where she was then thrown over a fence, then dragged over 100 yards from the employer's cabin. Gracie was then found lying in the woods with a brick covered in blood right next to her. The bloodstains were actually visible on the windowsill and the fence, and there was a clear trail coming from where she'd been dragged. Her head was covered with gashes inflicted by the brick, leaving both Gracie and Orange Washington dead that night. And guys, get this, there was still no real leads for the police. Now, before I tell you how the servant girl annihilator got away with all of these murders, let me tell you about his final victim. Christmas Eve 1885, 2 white women, this time Susanna Hancock and Eula Phillips, were attacked while they were in their homes. Hancock was hit repeatedly with an axe while she slept right in the head, causing obvious skull fractures. But it gets even worse. She was then cut and stabbed so many times that there was so much red stuff all around her, and guys, get this, she survived the attack. But then eventually she kicked the bucket and passed away from the injuries. Now, Eula Phillips was too dragged from her bed, assaulted in the, kind of way, and then killed with an axe. Once again, severe skull fractures, cuts, stabs, and blood was just everywhere. Her body was then dumped in a field near her home. That brings our total kill counter to 8 kills. 5 black women, 2 white women, and obviously 1 man. As you can probably imagine, the city was in a state of panic, with rumors and theories about the killer's identity trending on whatever their equivalent of Twitter was. Or I guess it's called X now. Was it a deranged local, or perhaps an outsider passing through the city? Some even speculated that the killer might be a famous or important person hiding in plain sight. Honestly, that would be pretty insane. I mean, imagine finding out O.J. Simpson was a serial killer. Oh wait. Anyways, the police rounded up some suspects, but none of the arrests led to a conviction. Although one of the most notable suspects was a man named Nathan Elgin, who was shot dead by the police in February 1886 while trying to arrest him for an unrelated crime. However, there was no concrete evidence to prove that he was guilty, and the case remained unsolved. But guys, this is the part where I literally almost dropped to the floor when I was researching for this video. Some historians believe that the servant girl annihilator I just told you about could have moved to London after his killing spree in Austin and continued his reign of terror over there while enjoying some tea and crumpets. Why do historians believe this? Because that's exactly when Jack the Ripper started his killing spree. So yes, ladies and boxheads, Jack the Ripper and the servant girl annihilator could very much be the same damn person. The similarities between the 2 cases are actually quite striking. Listen guys, I love my conspiracies, and obviously the similarities between the 2 cases are striking, but there's no actual real evidence linking the 2. But I thought it was kind of cool, so I included it in the video. Next up on our list, let's talk about the Alphabet Killer, a name that sounds like it belongs in a seriously messed up version of Sesame Street. But trust me, there's nothing child-friendly about this story. Between 1971 and 1973 in Rochester, New York, 3 young girls were abducted, assaulted in the... Honestly, at this point of the video, do I even have to explain what kind of assault it was? And obviously murdered. But get this, each of their first and last names started with the same letter. Don't believe me? Well, the victims were Carmen Colon, Wanda Wakowitz, and Michelle Maenza. It's like the killer was playing some demented version of Scramble or something. Anyways, let's get into the Alphabet Killer's first kill. 4:20 p.m. on November 16th, 1971, 10-year-old Carmen Colon was seen entering the pharmacy to run some errands for her grandmother. While she was inside, Carmen went to the front counter and spoke to the store owner. who was Jack Corbin, by the way. Jack actually knew Carmen kind of well, but what he told police officers is that Carmen seemed a little bit distracted or kind of tense in the store. After Jack looked at Carmen and told her that there would be a delay in the filling of her requested prescription. She looked at Jack and started repeatedly saying, "I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go," before she turned around and sprinted out the front door. As she left the pharmacy and began walking alongside West Main Street, a strange car, which some witnesses claim has been waiting for her for a while now, suddenly started driving towards her, and it was said that Carmen climbed into the back of the car when it just drove off. That right there was the last time anyone has seen Carmen Colon. Until 5:10 p.m. Carmen was then seen desperately running for her life down Rochester's Interstate 490, with the dark-colored Ford Pinto hatchback pursuing the young girl while the car was driving in reverse. She was waving her hands and pleading out for someone to help, trying to get any of the adults that were on the road to save her. And guys, not a single person stopped to help her. She even tried chasing down the damn cars that was passing by, trying to get at least one of them to stop. But when she looked back, the alphabet killer snatched her up from the side of the street and forced her back into his car. And on November 18th, 1971, 2 days after Carmen Colon's abduction, her body was discovered by two young boys who were out on a bike ride near I-490. She was found face down, unalive, like roadkill. Like, do you mean to tell me that no one stopped to help this little girl when she was running and begging for help? This girl did not have to die if just one person stopped to help her. Gosh. Anyways, the autopsy would reveal that the body was covered in fingernail scratch marks, signs of, and her skull was completely fractured. Are you sick to your stomach yet? Well, it was later determined that she died from being strangled to death. Yeah, they interviewed numerous witnesses and even detained a few suspects, but nothing led to a solid lead. As you would expect, the community was in an absolute uproar. Parents were terrified and children were kept under super close watch. Cops patrolled more than usual, and for a moment, Carmen's murder seemed like an isolated incident. That is, until the next girl disappeared. 5 p.m., April 2nd, 1973, Wanda Walkowitz was running some errands at the time of her disappearance just a few blocks away from her home. She made her way towards the local deli with a short list of groceries from her mom, Joyce. Is this all sounding a little bit familiar? Well, once Wanda bought milk, bread, cigarettes, and diapers from the store, she immediately left the store as she began heading back to her home around 5:15 p.m. At that moment, a large brown car began trailing Wanda as she struggled to carry her groceries. The witness that was recalling this whole scene was actually distracted for a second, and when they looked back, Wanda was gone. Like, she completely vanished and both her and the car were gone. That's when Joyce Walkowitz reported her daughter Wanda missing by 8 p.m. the same night. On April 2nd, nearly 50 detectives searched for Wanda in areas around her home, the store she was last seen at, and areas that she was known to play at after her school. It wouldn't be until around 10:15 a.m. the next day where a police officer would stumble upon the lifeless body of Wanda Walkowitz. Unlike Carmen though, Wanda was found fully dressed, and an autopsy would later indicate that she'd been reclothed after her death. And guys, the position of her body and the location of where it was found led investigators to believe that her body was tossed out of a moving car. It was also found that Wanda was assaulted in the way that you're already thinking. If things couldn't get any worse, she was also strangled to death, just like Carmen. The similarities between the two cases were so significant that no one could ignore it. And the police now knew they were dealing with a serial killer. Just when the community thought that things couldn't get any worse, on November 26th, 1973, at around 3:20 on that day, Michelle Mayenza's classmates saw Michelle crossing the street towards the plaza that was near the school. Why, you may be thinking? Well, that's because just days before, Michelle's mother lost her purse at the shopping plaza. So basically, this little girl was trying to do something nice for her mother. But just 10 minutes after her classmates saw her leave the school, Michelle was snatched up by the alphabet killer. By 3:30 on November 26th, witnesses saw a beige or tan car speeding down on Ackerman Street, for anyone that was curious. One witness actually saw the car almost cause a crash, and another saw a girl crying inside. And guys, it was confirmed by the witness that it was Michelle Mayenza. Sadly, the car got away, but at 5:30 p.m., a man on a motorcycle saw the same exact car with a flat tire on the side of the road. This time, I actually don't know what street it was on. And the man stopped to help. Then he noticed that the driver was gripping the girl's wrist really tightly. And when he offered to help, the driver forced the girl back into the car and hit his license plate, which caused the man on the motorcycle to ride away. I mean, would you have left too? I probably would have. Which left the poor girl behind and all alone with him. And at 10:30 a.m. on November 28th, 1973, a volunteer fire chief found the young girl's lifeless body in a ditch on Eddy Road. An autopsy later confirmed it was 11-year-old Michelle Mayenza. She was found with extensive blunt force trauma and signs of assault. Let's take a second here to understand what the people of Rochester were feeling at this time. 3 young girls, all with the first and last names starting with the same letter, abducted, then murdered in similar manner of A. being alone walking home, B. lured into a big brown car, and C. strangled to death, beaten, and killed and left in towns nearby. Yeah, the police response to this was to bring in the FBI profilers, conducted door-to-door interviews, and set up roadblocks everywhere. But the killer remained at large. And like the other cases we talked about today, the lack of forensic technology at the time made this investigation nearly impossible. And guys, don't forget, there was no DNA tests, no surveillance cameras, and no social media to spread awareness of the situation. There was no hashtag change your names fast. It was old-fashioned police work against this ruthless killer. One of the prime suspects in the case was a man named Kenneth Bianchi, who later, interestingly enough, became infamous as one of the Hillside Stranglers. Bianchi lived in Rochester during the time of the murders and actually fit the profile of the killer. However, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the Alphabet Killer case, and he was never formally charged. Another suspect was Carmen's uncle Miguel Colon. Why? Well, that's because the dark-colored Ford Pinto seen chasing Carmen Colon was suspiciously similar to the car Miguel purchased only weeks before her abduction. Hold on. It gets more compelling. He had a criminal record and fled to Puerto Rico shortly after Carmen's murder. I mean, seriously, does this guy sound innocent to you? Anyways, despite being a person of interest, there was no hard evidence against him, and he was never extradited back to the US to face charges for the murders. Obviously, there was a lot more people that were interrogated, but in the end, the Alphabet Killer was never actually caught. Alright, this first killer killed 4 people in cold blood, then sliced his own genitals and tongue just so it would look like a snake's head. Oh, and he also carved 666 into his own head. Yep, this is Nico Jenkins, who was born on September 16th, 1986 in Colorado. His upbringing was, let's just say, it wasn't the greatest. Almost his entire family were convicted felons. His mother was convicted of various street pharmacy charges, robberies, and was in jail throughout his whole home life. His daddy wasn't any better. I mean, he was convicted of assault and robbery. And what was his sissy doing? She was convicted of the same stuff during their entire childhood as well. What do all the boxes say? They weren't the sharpest tools in the shed. Anyways, his family abused him verbally, physically, and it even got reported that Nico was assaulted in the, sexual kind of way. But get this, his own damn cousin. I seriously can't help but feel bad for this guy. When he was 7 years old, he was put into the foster system, and doctors claimed that he was, how do I say this in the PG-13 way? He was considering unaliving himself. And he was bipolar at the age of only 8 years old, which it's quite hard for a kid that age to fake it. Anyways, many psychologists later diagnosed him with schizophrenia. He was constantly talking about voices in his head and, things that people were saying in his head, including, and I'm not even kidding about this, the Egyptian god Apophis. Yeah, he thinks an Egyptian god was talking in his head. Anyways, at age 7, he had been expelled from school for bringing a handgun to class. And by the age of just 13 years old, he had already built up a substance problem. Yeah, 13 years old. This list obviously just keeps going, so to sum it up, he was always in trouble. Now, let's get into his killing streak that ended him in being in death row. When he was 17, he was convicted of 2 armed carjackings and was later sentenced to 21 years of prison time. However, this is where the story gets a little bit tricky. Trust me, this will all make sense into understanding how 4 innocent people were brutally murdered. Alright, the judge in this case, and his infinite wisdom, decided to run the charges concurrently and not consecutively. Okay, you're probably wondering, what does that even mean? Basically, if you get charged with multiple counts of a crime, it's common for the judge to say 4 sentences of however many years. But depending on the crime, like if it's something non-violent, they will run them at the same time so you don't spend your whole life behind bars. Now, this is good for people who were just being punished for a simple mistake. However, this was a very, very bad idea for someone like Nico, which you're later gonna understand. See, if they did it consecutively, he would have remained in prison for over twice as long, which would have saved the lives of innocent people, and you'll understand all of that in about 2 minutes. Oh, before I forget, in 2009, Nico Jenkins and his sister were allowed to temporarily leave the prison with a corrections officer to accompany them at their own grandmother's funeral, which sounds all nice and all. But during the funeral, a guard uncuffed one of Jenkins' hands so that he could use the gentleman's room. Then this man and his sister turned around and started attacking the guards. Yeah, then somehow Nico was released from prison in July of 2013. Here's the kicker, having only served about half of the time that he should have. Okay, but his time in prison wasn't a normal experience. He was abused horribly there. Wait, let's rewind a bit. Nico was put into solitary confinement for his behavioral problems, and he was denied mental health care and put in a cell alone for nearly 10 whole years. Can you just imagine that? Being in a room the size of a king mattress with no human contact for 10 whole years. Okay, so now in 2013, you're now about to stick a severely mentally deranged person who was locked up for the last 10 years back into public nothing happened. And you can probably guess what happened. At 5:01 a.m. on August 11th, 2013, just a few weeks after Nico's release from prison, 2 dead bodies were found in a white pickup truck in Omaha, Nebraska, with their heads blown off with a damn shotgun. The cops had no other leads other than deer slug casings found at the crime scene. The 2 victims were later identified as Juan and Jorge. Alright, here's what's interesting. It was said that they were lured in with the promise of sexual gratification, that night. And it wasn't our man Nico luring him in, it was his sister. I guess you could say they got blown away. Nope. Let me stop trying to be edgy. That's not my box. Anyways, it didn't stop there because just a goddamn week later, on August 19th around 7 a.m., the body of 22-year-old Curtis Bradford was found. Where, you may ask? Outside a garage with 2 bullet wounds in his damn head. Get this, they found deer slug casings at the scene too. Now, this is crazy because during the short time Nico wasn't in solitary confinement, Curtis was actually a prison inmate that was living with him in the jail cell. Hold on, guys, it gets more juicy than that. The 2 met up with each other at a party the night before and posted this picture together on Facebook. They partied the night away, and the next day Nico just killed him for no reason at all. I guess that's one way to solve a hangover. Anyways, a few days later on August 21st, 2013 at around 2 a.m., a woman named Andrea Kruger was getting off her shift at a bar called, wait, let me make sure I'm reading this right, the Deja Vu Lounge. Oh, and deja vu it was. When she was driving home, there was a strange vehicle that stopped her in the middle of the damn road. The killer got out of his vehicle, walked to Andrea's driver's side door, opened it, then dragged her ass out. What did he do to her? Well, she was found with multiple 12-gauge shotgun blasts to her face. Not only that, neck and shoulder too. And if you're wondering where her car went, it was completely gone. The cops arrived on the scene and the gunshot wounds matched the pickup truck murders. And because of that, now the cops knew that they had a serial killer on a spree. Yeah, and spree it was. 4 murders, 10 days? Hello? So, how was he caught? On August 29th, 2013, a woman called 911 saying that Nico Jenkins threatened to kill her and her entire family. Yeah, because of that, Jenkins was arrested on terroristic threats. But now you're probably wondering, how did they know that he murdered the 4 people? Well, when the cops looked at the security footage of the apartment, they noticed he was carrying a bag into the apartment, which is when they obtained a search warrant for the bag. then found the gun that used the exact same shell casings from the Kruger murder scene. Oh, and his DNA was plastered all over the shell casings. But yeah, those 10 years in isolation probably didn't make him a rocket scientist or anything. Once the gun was found, he was interviewed for 8 straight hours, where he wasted no second throwing his own sister under the bus.
Well, y'all don't even understand, man. I don't understand how hard this is for me right now, because I'm portraying my family. Do you understand it? This is not just me. I understand one family's getting closer, you know, but I'm literally betraying my family and my bloodline.
After hours and hours of Nico getting drilled in this interrogation room, they finally got him to crack.
I got Nico Jenkins. Do you not realize that? I got Nico Jenkins. I got you.
What do you mean you got me?
I got your DNA at the murder scene. I got your DNA in the car.
Sir.
I got the weapon. I got Nico Jenkins. I don't need to make it. I don't care about it. I just want other people that are involved in it. What the hell happened out there? And why? I already, I know who. I know what. I know when. I know where.
That woman's husband and children. That woman's husband is grieving right now. This is not just some psycho killer that just wanted to go trophy. I'm documenting psychiatrically disordered. Mm-hmm. I'm documenting chemically imbalanced. This is a fact.
Yeah.
So my point is,
we're well aware of that.
My point is this though. This family didn't deserve this.
Right.
This could have been prevented had it not been for Nebraska Department of Corrections doing what they knew what they supposed to have did. And they never gave me an opportunity. They never gave me an opportunity for treatment because I wouldn't take the medicine.
Nico then admitted to all 4 killings, and get this, that he did it as a sacrifice to the ancient Egyptian god Apophis. He pleaded guilty to all 4 without blinking and said that he would defend the kingdom of Apophis with animalistic, savage brutality. I'm scared of this dude just writing this. In May of 2017, Jenkins was sentenced to death and 450 years of prison time. Wow. In 450 years, will people be subscribed to Boxhead? Oh, now that I mention it, you should, yeah, you know what to do. Oh, and fun fact, he is still alive in prison awaiting his death day. This next killer is so deranged that he killed 10 people and even had sexual encounters with a decapitated corpse. And I'm talking about none other than Edmund Kemper III. The guy who makes every horror movie villain look like a goddamn Boy Scout. And he was born on December 18th, 1948. In Burbank, California. Kemper was a middle child in a family that seemed to have been, cursed by some sort of weird gene. But first, let's talk about his parents. His mom, Claire Nell, was a real piece of work. She spent more time bitching relentlessly about her husband's lame job as an electrician than actually being, a decent human being. Well, maybe I wouldn't boom the mailman if you drove a Ferrari. Anyways, Edmund's dad, who was Edmund Kemper II, was a World War II vet who actually tested nuclear bombs, which is actually kind of dope. Now here's where things get interesting. Kemper was a bit of a freak of nature. His ass weighed a whole 13 pounds as a freaking newborn. How did this woman even push this out her thing? Like, hello? By the age of 4, he was already towering over the other kids like some sort of giant from a fairy tale. But trust me, there was nothing magical about this guy's future. Kemper wasn't exactly the kind of kid you'd want babysitting your pets. And by the age of 10, he was already showing off his psychopathic skills. One day, he decided to bury the family's cat alive. Dug it up later, decapitated it, and then proudly mounted its head on a spike like it was some sort of messed up trophy. Yeah, delightful, right? And what gets crazier is this wasn't even a one-time thing. When he was 13, he killed another family cat because he thought it liked his sister more than him. I mean, listen, I'm a dog person too, but like, come on, you don't see me doing all this. And if you're the type of person that thinks playing with dolls was kind of creepy, which it is, Kemper took the creepiness level to a whole new dimension. He'd perform these super weird-ass rituals with his sister's dolls. Yeah, nothing to look into there. While he was just casually decapitating and ripping their limbs off, no big deal. Hold on, let me take you deeper into Kemper's mind. One time when his older sister teased him about not kissing his teacher, he calmly replied, "If I kiss her, I'd have to kill her first." Like, hello? Have to kill her first? Does that turn you on, little Kempy? But Kemper didn't just dish out the violence. He was also attacked. Yeah, their family was super messed up. Get this, his older sister once tried to push him in front of a train. Another time, she pushed him into the deep end of a swimming pool where he almost drowned. Yeah, seems like a super great family. But hey, if she pulled off killing him, at least the rest of the world wouldn't have to deal with what would come next. Honestly, Kemper was surprisingly pretty close to his dad, so when his parents divorced in 1961, it hit him hard. He was sent to live with his mother in Montana, a move that was basically like throwing gasoline onto a fire pit. His mom, Clarnell, was a raging alcoholic. I mean, she'd regularly belittle him, humiliate him, and even force him to sleep in a locked basement because she was convinced that he would harm his sisters. Alright, to be fair, this guy probably would've. Oh, and she also made sure to mock him for his size. No, not that size, you pervs. What I'm talking about is he was already 6'4" by the age of 15. So because of that, he was a real weirdo. Yeah, isn't that some lovely mothering? Anyways, Clarnell was so twisted that she refused to show him any affection because she was terrified it would turn him gay. Clarnell, I don't really know if that's how that works. And to really twist in the knife, she would remind him that no woman on the planet would ever love him. Ouch. At the age of 14, Kemper had enough and ran away from home to try and live with his dad in Los Angeles. But when he got there, he found out that his dear old daddy had remarried to a new woman, Alfreda Weber, who had already had a son named Gilbert, and didn't exactly have a spot for his giant-ass son. So, what did the daddy do? He sent Kemper to live off with his grandparents on a ranch in Norfolk, California. Now, Kemper hated it there, describing his grandfather as senile and his grandmother as someone who was constantly emasculating him. Wait, let me get the exact quote. Was constantly emasculating me and my grandfather. Sounds like another fun-ass household, am I right? Then came August 27th, 1964. The day 15-year-old Kemper decided to start his murder spree. After an argument with his grandmother, Kemper decided to storm off, grabbed a rifle that his grandfather had given him, and shot her right in the head. Her last words? "Oh, you'd better not be shooting the birds again." Well, to be fair, he wasn't shooting the birds. But yeah, I'd say shooting your grandma's a tad bit worse. When his grandfather came home from grocery shopping, Kemper, he decided to shoot him too. Why? Because he didn't want his grandpa to be mad at him for killing his grandma. Now when you put it like that, it makes perfect sense. Completely a sane person making that decision. And after the murders, Kemper called his mom, who told him to turn himself in. He did, and the court psychiatrist actually diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and sent him off to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. But here's the twist. While he was there, the psychiatrist at the hospital disagreed with the paranoid schizophrenia. You know, like the diagnosis. Instead, and this is so crazy, they found that instead, Kemper was actually intelligent, introspective, and diagnosed him with, wait, let me say this properly, personality trait disturbance and passive-aggressive type. Yes, that is seriously what medical professionals came up to after this kid killed both his grandparents. Basically, they thought he was messed up but not insane. And wouldn't you know it, by 1969, Kemper was released on parole on his 21st birthday. He was sent to live with his mother, who had, remarried, divorced again, and was living in Aptos, California. I think I'm saying that right. Despite the obvious warning signs, the psychiatrist thought that Kemper was rehabilitated, even expunging his juvenile records. Like, hello? He killed his goddamn grandpappies. He's not normal. One report even praised him as a very well-adjusted young man. Yeah, talk about missing the red flags, man. Alright, to give it to Kemper, he did try to go and save his life. He even attended a community college with hopes of becoming a police officer. Hey, I want to be a cop. I've already got experience in shooting people. You're in, kid. We love that. It's probably how something like that would have gone. Alright, but now he is 6'9". by the way. And now you're probably wondering, how's mommy? Well, Zendaya's actually doing quite fine. You wanted to hear about his mommy. Gotcha. Well, Kemper's relationship with his mother didn't improve after he got out. You see, they'd have these super vicious battles. One of their biggest fights over whether he should get his teeth cleaned. Yeah, he was a stinky boy. Eventually, he moved out, but his mother would not leave him alone, constantly calling him and dropping by unannounced. Despite being in his early 20s, he could not escape her grasp. And the toxic relationship continued to get worse and worse. Kemper's twisted fantasies escalated, and between May 1972 and April 1973, he killed, hold on, listen closely, 8 people, including 5 college students, and these were the names and how they killed them. First up, we have Mary Ann Pesce and Anita Lucchesa. These two were just 18-year-old college students hitchhiking their way through life. Sounds fun, right? Well, it was about to not be. They were picked up by Kemper on May 7th, 1972, in Berkeley, California. Kemper, with his smooth talk and fake-ass charm, convinced them that he was harmless, and you guys know he wasn't. He drove them to a secluded area far away from safety. What should have been a simple ride turned into their worst nightmare. Kemper handcuffed Mary and locked Anita in the trunk before brutally stabbing them to death. And as if that wasn't enough, he took their bodies back to his apartment, where he then dismembered them and did just unspeakable things. Yeah, Kemper wasn't just a killer, he was a monster who took dark fantasies to a whole new level. Then there was Aiko Ku, a 15-year-old dance student who was just trying to get to her dance class on September 14th, 1972. She missed her bus and decided to hitchhike. Instead, I don't know. Probably thinking that she'd get to class on time. Instead, she ended up in the car of a predator. Kemper pulled a gun on her, strangled her unconscious, and then unalived her. But it did not stop there. He took her body to the back of his apartment, just like the others, and treated her with the same horrifying brutality. Just like imagine the fear and confusion she must have felt, trusting a stranger who turned out to be the last person that she would ever see when she was alive. Next, we have Cindy Shaw, an 18-year-old student from Cabrillo College. On January 7th, 1973, she was picked up by Kemper as she walked on campus, probably thinking she could get a lift to her next class. Instead, she ended up being another victim of his sick mind. Kemper shot her, hid her body in his trunk, and then drove off to his mother's house. The fact that he brought his victims back to his mother's place says a lot about his twisted relationship with her. He kept her body hidden in the room overnight, like some sort of grotesque trophy, before dismembering her in the bathtub. If that doesn't send chills down your spine, I don't know what will. Next, we have Rosalind Thrope and Alice Liu, who were 2 more students who crossed paths with Kemper. On February 5th, 1973, Kemper shot both of them in his car, right there in broad daylight. What's even more twisted is that he beheaded them in the car before bringing the bodies inside. Ugh. Gross, am I right? On April 20th, 1973, Kemper reached his breaking point. His mom came home one night from a party, and after some snarky comments, all those years of pain and torture came out at once. And Kemper decided it was time to end it once and for all. He bludgeoned her with a hammer, sliced her throat open, and then decapitated her. But he didn't stop there. Then, as you would do, he used her head as a damn dartboard, cut her tongue, and tried to dispose of them in a garbage disposal. When the garbage disposal spit the parts back out, he thought it was fitting, given how much she bitched and screamed at him over the years. I know, this guy's sick. After hiding her body in the closet, he invited her best friend over, Sarah Sally Taylor Hallett, and killed her too. And then left a note for the police. The note read, hold on, let me get the exact quote. "No need for her to suffer at the hands of the horrible, murderous butcher." Weirdo. Kemper drove off to Pueblo, Colorado, thinking the police were hot on his trail. But when he didn't hear any news reports about the murders, he called the cops himself and confessed. I wonder what the call went like. "Guys, I liked you. I killed my mom and you don't even try to get me?" At first, obviously they didn't believe him because who would call about that? But after a few more calls, they finally took him serious. When they showed up, he was waiting for them, ready to be taken into custody. At his trial, Kemper tried to plead insanity, claiming that two beings inhibited in his body took over when the killer was there. The killer was apparently not him, and the sensation was like blacking out apparently. But the jury wasn't buying it from this ham sandwich, and they found him to be perfectly sane and then charged him with 8 counts. Yeah, 8 counts of first-degree murder on all counts, sentencing him to 8 concurrent life sentences in prison. And with that, boxheads, Kemper has been in prison since 1973. And what's really shocking about this whole thing is he's actually a model prisoner. He even narrated audiobooks for visually impaired and claims to have found peace with himself through God. But whoa. Don't make any mistake. Kemper is still the same guy who decapitated his mother and then used her head as target practice. Next, we have Timothy McVeigh, a guy who hurt 680 people just because he didn't want to pay his taxes. Well, kind of. Let's just get right into it. Anyways, Timothy McVeigh was born on April 23rd, 1968 in Lockport, New York. He was the middle child, and honestly, middle child syndrome doesn't even begin to cover what happened here. His parents split when he was around like 10, and after that, he lived with his dad. Trust me, this will all become relevant in a little bit. In 1988, McVeigh joined the US Army, where he was actually pretty good at his job. He was a top scoring gunner and even got promoted to sergeant. But spoiler alert, he didn't like the government for too long. He made friends with Terry Nichols, a guy who shared his love for guns and killing people. These two would later team up to do some pretty horrific stuff. McVeigh served in the Gulf War and did his job pretty well, but the experience being over there left him broken. He saw the horrors of war up close and personal, which only fueled his growing hatred for the government. He had some issues in the army, like getting reprimanded for buying a white power t-shirt at a KKK rally. Yeah, not exactly a shining moment, we'll say. After the war, McVeigh tried to join the Special Forces, but eventually dropped out. He then left the army and started ranting about taxes, government outreach, and people not subscribing to Boxhead or something. He even wrote letters to newspapers complaining about the government taking his hard-earned money. Yeah, he was that guy. McVeigh's anger towards the government reached a boiling point with the events at Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege. So let's actually get into these events, and I guess we'll start off with Ruby Ridge that happened in 1992. This guy named Randy Weaver, living off the grid with his family in the mountains of Idaho. Yeah. I haven't heard of Idaho either, don't worry about it. Now, Weaver wasn't exactly your average suburban dad. He was a guy who always felt like he had to survive, someone who believed the government was up to no good at all times. And he wasn't shy about his anti-government views. The feds actually got interested in Weaver because he sold a couple of sawed-off shotguns to an undercover ATF agent. Yeah, that's a big no-no in the no-no square. But instead of just showing up with the warrant and having a nice, calm chat, the situation escalated into an 11-day standoff that turned into a nightmare. The US Marshals went to scope out the property and things went south pretty fast. Shots were fired, and in the chaos, Weaver's 14-year-old son Sammy and a US Marshal ended up dead. As if that wasn't bad enough, the next day, an FBI sniper took a shot at Randy Weaver, but instead, get this, hit his wife, Vicky, who was holding their infant daughter at the time. She instantly died. The standoff eventually ended, but not before the Weaver family was destroyed and the public was left asking the government, hey, what's going on, guys? But it gets worse with the government. Let's fast forward to 1993, and we've got the Waco siege. Oh, this one's a doozy. David Koresh was the leader of a religious group called the Branch Davidians. I think I'm saying Davidians, right? God, I gotta be dyslexic. Koresh wasn't just preaching peace and love and unity. Nope, he was stockpiling weapons and preaching the apocalypse. From his compound outside of Waco, Texas, the ATF heard about the whole guns and God situation and decided it was time to step in, and if they were lucky, maybe they would get to shoot a dog or two. Just kidding. But the raid did not go as planned. Gunfire erupted, and 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were killed in the shootout. Instead of just backing off, the feds dug in for a 51-day siege, trying to get Koresh and his followers to surrender. After 51 whole-ass days, The FBI decided to end the standoff by simply launching a tear gas assault on the compound. What followed was nothing short of just horrifying. A fire just completely broke out from the gas being flammable and, yeah, good job, guys. The entire compound was up in flames. 76 people, including Koresh and a bunch of little kids, died in the flames. Waco wasn't just a tragedy. It was a freaking PR disaster for the government. The images of the burning compound and the remains of the Branch Davidians made it clear that the government was out to crush anyone who didn't toe the line. Sounds like shady, right? Well, when McVeigh decided to strike back, he wasn't messing around. He started selling survivor gear and copies of the Turner Diaries. Me too. What are the Turner Diaries? I was wondering that as well. A book that's basically the Bible for people who hate the government. He also began experimenting with explosives. Sounds fun. You know, just your average Joe type of activity. And he even considered assassinating government officials, but decided that blowing up a federal building would send a louder message. Literally. On April 19th, 1995, McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck filled with 5,000 pounds of explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. He got out of the truck, covered his face with a ball cap, and walked away. Tick, tick, tick. 9:02 a.m. Kaboom! The bomb went off, killing 160 people, including 19 children and injuring over 680 others. The explosion destroyed 1/3 of the building and was the worst terrorist attack on American soil before 9/11. Just a couple hours after the bombing, McVeigh was pulled over for driving without a license plate. Okay, for all things to get caught for, license plate? Dude! Anyways, he was arrested for carrying an illegal firearm, but little did the cops know. They had just caught the most wanted in America. It wasn't until 3 days later that McVeigh was identified as the bomber and linked to the truck used in the attack. McVeigh claimed that he didn't know that there was a daycare center in the building, but his co-conspirator, Nichols, said that they both knew and didn't care. So take that for what it's worth. Or what did the white boxes usually say, with a grain of salt? After the bombing, McVeigh was pretty unapologetic. Off. In interviews, he compared the bombing to US military actions overseas, saying that people die every day, so what's the big deal? Yeah, not exactly the kind of I'm sorry you'd hope for. McVeigh was indicted on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and the murder of 8 federal officials. The trial was moved to Denver because, surprise, surprise, Oklahoma City wasn't the best place to find an unbiased jury. On June 2nd, 1997, McVeigh was found guilty on all accounts and sentenced to death. The jury didn't buy his necessity defense that argued the bombing was a justifiable response to the government's actions at Waco. Instead, they recommended the death penalty, which was exactly what McVeigh wanted. He saw his execution as state-assisted suicide. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection on June 11th, 2001. What was his last meal? Well, it was 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Because if you're gonna go out, you might as well go out with your favorite dessert. These 2 kids actually murdered a 2-year-old boy. You ever hear the term them kids? Well, this is exactly why. These kids are actually the worst in British history. Alright, so let's rewind to February 12th, 1993. And this is the case of John Venables and Robert Thompson. 2 10-year-old kids. Yeah, you heard me right. Holy crap, 10-year-old kids. These 2 kids managed to do something so awful that it left the entire country asking how kids could be so evil. But wait, let's start from the beginning. So John Venables and Robert Thompson were just 2 kids growing up in Liverpool, England. And they weren't exactly the type to bring home gold stars on their homework. Both of them came from rough, unstable homes. Venables was known to be pretty chaotic and had an abusive family life. His parents were separated and neither one cared much for him. And Thompson's mom, well, let's just say she wasn't winning any Parent of the Year awards either. She was a heavy drinker, and he was one of 7 kids who didn't get much care. February 12th, 1993, Venables and Thompson decided to skip school. I mean, kids skipping school, yeah, not really that shocking. But it's what they did after that was truly evil. Now imagine this, it's a normal day at the New Strand Shopping Center in Bootle. Leave it to the British to name an area Bootle. I can already see the comments now. Well, at least our skews aren't shooting ranges. Yeah, so Venables and Thompson were wandering around the mall having skipped school to do, kid stuff. Like trying to steal whatever they could get their hands on, but that wasn't enough for them. Nope, they had something a lot worse in mind. So at some point during their mall stealing, the boys noticed a 2-year-old named James Bolger. He was with his mom, Denise, but as every parent knows, it's impossible to keep an eye on your kid 24/7. In one split second, just one, Denise looked away and Venables and Thompson made their move. Want some Pokemon cards? I mean, the poor kid responded probably with like goo goo gaga. I mean, the kid was like 2 years old, man, come on. So one step at a time, pretending to be his friend, they led James away from the store and his mother would never see him again. Yep, 2 kids took another kid. And like you would expect, no one noticed. I mean, these were just kids being themselves, right? People even saw them walking with the little James, but they honestly thought nothing of it. It was like, oh, how sweet, big brother's taking care of the little guy. If only they knew. They took James on a nearly 2.5-mile walk through Liverpool. And yes, you're probably wondering, why didn't anyone stop them? Well, several people did actually notice, but when Venables and Thompson said James was their brother, or that he was just lost, everyone just shrugged it off. So like after wandering the streets for hours, the boys led James to a railway. Now, let me just say this right now, what happens next is awful and viewer discretion is advised. The boys start by torturing James. And for obvious reasons, I'm not gonna draw the kid in these scenes because, like, come on. Anyways, they threw bricks and stones at him, they kicked him, and even shoved paint into his eyes. I mean, can you even imagine? This is a 2-year-old kid we're talking about. He didn't stand a chance. At some point during this brutal attack, Venables and Thompson dropped James on his head, which is probably what finally unalived him. Then, in one final act, they placed his lifeless body on the train tracks of Walton and Anfield Station in Liverpool, hoping a train would hit him and cover up what they did. The train, like you would expect, did eventually run over James, but by that time, he was already dead. And these sick 10-year-old kids went home like nothing happened. Now, as you would imagine, when James was reported missing and the boy's mom was going crazy, scared for her little boy, the police jumped to action. But with no leads and no real idea of what happened, they worked against the clock. It wasn't until 2 days later, on February 14th, that James's body was found still on the tracks and hit by the train. But the authorities saw the injuries on the kid and thought, hey, it just could have been from the train. But since when do trains throw rocks? And hold on, let me tell you, it was so brutal that the police initially thought an adult must have done this. But surprise, the real shock came when CCTV footage from the shopping mall was released. It showed James walking with the 2 monsters that were only 10 years old. And boxheads, let me tell you, the public was stunned. I mean, everyone was expecting some shadowy figure, some monstrous adult, but it was 2 kids. On February 20th, 1993, Venables and Thompson were arrested. Drop the Pokemon cards and put your hands in the air. And get this, when they were taken in for questioning, neither of them showed any real remorse. Venables cried during his confession, but honestly, it was hard to tell if it was out of guilt or fear of him getting caught. Thompson, on the other hand, was cold as ice. Like, how does a 10-year-old even process what he just did? Their trial became a circus. These 2 boys weren't even teenagers yet, but they were being tried as adults. Good, buddy, good. Eat your goddamn crumpets in jail, you sick fuck. Anyways, now imagine that. Kids in court being held responsible for one of the most disgusting freaking crimes the UK had ever seen, topping even the great tea and crumpets heist of 1990. Trigger warning for the British. Just kidding. That's not real, but guys, the dentists are. Okay, enough for the jokes, my bad. I forgot to mention that during the trial, it came out that Venables and Thompson had actually planned all of this. Nope, it wasn't just a random thing. They had actually tried to kidnap another child child earlier that day, but the kid's mom intervened. They found all of this out during a witness testimony. The mom just scolded the boys and they ran off. Yeah, you heard me correctly. They had every intention of doing this from the start. Wanna trade a Pokemon card? Nah, let's just murder. Like what? Venables and Thompson were convicted of James Bulger's murder in November 1993. They were sentenced to be held at Her Majesty's pleasure, which is really British way of saying that they were locked up for good. But here's the part that really gets people and even me. They were both released in 2001 when they were just 18 years old. Yep, they just got new identities and tried to live their lives like nothing happened. I mean, isn't that gross? The same kids who brutally murdered a young toddler were released back into society like, nothing happened. Venables, though, couldn't seem to keep his life together after his release. He was arrested in 2010 for possessing child videos, which I'm not gonna talk more about that. Let's just say, not exactly shocking, right? He was sent back to prison and was released again in 2013. And then, because he clearly didn't learn, he was busted again in 2017. For, you guessed it, more child, yeah. This time he got a 40-month sentence. Okay, couldn't they just axe this guy? Like, he's not learning clearly. Gosh. And as for Thompson, well, not much is known about him. I mean, he's been flying under the radar, successfully staying out of the limelight. Okay, so that last one was rough, but it doesn't get any better. You've probably heard some wild stories before, probably here on the page, but this one, oh, it's on a whole nother level. We're talking about Amarjit Sada, an 8-year-old boy who's probably the youngest damn serial killer in history. Don't quote me on that. So Amarjit Sada was born in 1998 in the village of Begusaraya in the Indian state Bihar. You're probably picturing a small, tight-knit community where everyone knows each other, and you'd be right. Amarjit came from an extremely poor family. His dad scrapped together whatever work he could find, and like many families, life wasn't exactly easy for them. But what no one realized was just how much darkness had already crept into Amarjit's young mind. Amarjit did something absolutely disgusting and killed his first victim. Who was that? It was his own cousin, a 6-month-old baby. Amarjit lured his baby cousin away from the family's watchful eyes and brutally assassinated her. After killing his cousin, you'd think someone would report this, right? Well, not quite. The family, for reasons that still boggle my box mind, decided to stay quiet. Some think that it's just out of shame or fear of looking like bad parents, but regardless of why, no one called the authorities and Amarjit walked away without any punishment. And if you're thinking, okay, well, that's an isolated incident, surely that was the end of it. Well, you would be, in fact, box dead wrong. Fast forward a bit and we've got another victim. This time it was Amarjit's own baby sister who was less than a year old. Yeah, you heard that correctly. He killed his own sister. And he did it exactly the same way as before, luring her away and ending her life before anyone could stop him. And again, the family didn't say a word. I mean, could you imagine 2 infants from the same family brutally killed by their 8-year-old son? And then they just stayed quiet? Once again, my mind, in its box shape, be boggling, bro. And you have to ask, what was going on with Amarjit? I mean, was the kid just evil? No one can really say for sure, and it's not like anyone was rushing to get help at this point either. So naturally, this story did not stop here. Here's where things go from a box to a goddamn head. Amarjit's third victim was the neighbor's baby girl, only 6 months old. Yeah, you could probably see a pattern forming here. This kid had some sort of obsession with unaliving babies. On this particular day in 2007, Amarjit found the perfect opportunity. The baby's mother, likely trusting that no one in her small village would harm her tiny baby child, left her daughter unattended reportedly at a small school. You know, just for a little bit. And that's all Amarjit needed. He took the baby, carried her off to a secluded area, and well, you know the rest. When the body was found this time, the truth could not stay buried. The locals quickly connected the dots, realizing that Amarjit had been around during the time of the baby's disappearance. And when they confronted him, he calmly admitted to the murder. Amarjit, are you killing babies again? No, Papa, no. Telling lies? Kicks a rock. Some boxheads in the comments might ask, why is my Indian accent so well? I don't know. More box head lore. Anyways, this 8-year-old boy casually confessed to killing not just this baby, but the other two as well. No remorse, no tears, like he did not care. When Amarjeet was arrested in 2007, the police were just in shock. They had never dealt with anything like this before. An 8-year-old serial killer, like even I haven't heard of that. I mean, my job is literally to cover the weirdest, most shocking, most disgusting stories on the internet, which if you want to hear more, hit that subscribe button, but that's besides the point. Anyways, according to reports, when asked why he did it, Amarjeet simply smiled. The boy's family finally spoke up after his arrest, admitting that they knew about the earlier murders but didn't report them. I mean, you'd think after the first death, something would have clicked, right? But since this part of the world doesn't have much law enforcement, the parents were not arrested for the cover-up. I mean, what do you guys think? Comment if you think that's fair. Like, should they have got in trouble? I don't know. Not for me to say. But no, they decided to stay quiet, and these 3 innocent babies lost their lives because of this monster and I guess the people that helped him. Amarjeet was placed in a juvenile detention facility, which is kids' jail if you didn't know. Which is where things again get a little bit complicated. You see, in India, the legal system is a bit different when it comes to child criminals. At the time of his arrest, Indian law didn't allow children under the age of 18 to be formally charged with murder. So Amarjeet was sent to a children's home instead of a prison. And since juvenile records are sealed, there's been little information about what happened to him since. He could be out there in the world right now. Like seriously, he could be watching this video. Weird. This next child murderer is actually a little girl. Ooh, fight the patriarchy. I'm kidding. Okay, so her name was Mary Bell, who, you guessed it, was another child killer. In 1968, an 11-year-old girl from Newcastle, England, got some fame for doing things most children don't even think is possible, which is, again, killing people. First, let's rewind to Mary's childhood because trust me, it's a big part of understanding how all this even happened. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957, to Betty Bell, who was a lady of the night, we'll say. With the father, you may have guessed it, being a lady of the night is unknown. In fact, Betty reportedly tried to give Mary away multiple times, and she abused her daughter both physically and emotionally. I mean, how's that for a loving start in life, right? Oh, and I forgot to mention that there's strong evidence that Betty forced Mary to engage in, you know, weird kind of acts with her clients when she was as young as 5 years old. On May 25th, 1968, just a day before Mary's 11th birthday, she committed her first murder. Her victim, 4-year-old Martin Brown. Mary knew Martin from their neighborhood. I mean, she lured Martin into an abandoned house in the area that the kids would play at. That's where she strangled him to death. Then, after killing him, she just walked away. No remorse, no panic. It's as if she didn't quite grasp the gravity of what she just did. There wasn't a missing persons report. His body was found shortly after by other kids that were, you know, playing there. The thing is, at first, no one suspected a murderer, and Martin's death was ruled an accident. They thought he just fell somewhere. There were no visible signs of trauma, and the idea that a little girl would have killed him, well, no one was thinking along those lines. So, like you would expect, the case was closed temporarily. Now, if you're thinking good old Mary Bell would lay low after her first murder, well, I mean, this is where you're wrong. Just a few days later, Mary and her friend Norma Bell, they got the same last name but no relation, it's just a weird coincidence. Anyways, they broke into a nursery and trashed the place. They wrote disturbing messages like, "I murder so that I may come back," and "We did murder Martin Brown." Yeah, talk about a crazy cry for attention, am I right? But get this, the police brushed it off like it was some prank. I mean, what are the odds that 2 little girls would be actually confessing to a murder? Maybe the cops should listen a little bit more. Then came the second murder. On July 31st, 1968, just 2 months after Martin Brown's death, Mary struck again. This time her victim was 3-year-old Brian Howe. Now, Mary's behavior during this murder was even more disturbing. She strangled Brian just like she'd done with Martin, but this time she took it a bit further. After Brian was dead, she mutilated his body with scissors. Yeah, scissors, cutting his hair and scratching up his legs. She even carved an M for Mary into his stomach. If you didn't already think that this case was horrifying enough, this part should really make you cringe. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Mary's accomplice in the second murder was once again her friend Norma Bell. After Brian's body was found, police quickly realized that this wasn't an accident. They suspected murder this time, and that's when they started putting the pieces together. So, how did the police catch Mary Bell? Well, it turns out that Mary couldn't keep her mouth shut. She started acting strangely, asking neighbors if they missed Brian, and even taking people to the scene of the crime as if she wanted to relive the moment. She also made comments to the police saying things like, "I know what happened to Brian because I saw him last." Not exactly subtle. When police began questioning local children, both Mary and Norma's names kept coming up. Witnesses said that they kept seeing the two girls with Brian on the day of his murder, and their suspicious behavior made them prime suspects. During interrogations, Mary tried to pin the blame on Norma, but it didn't take long for the police to figure out who the real leader was. On August 7th, 1968, Mary Bell was officially arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. And for you guys wondering, she was only 11 years old. Yeah, you heard me correctly. An 11-year-old girl was charged with murdering 2 toddlers. Mary's trial began in December 1968, and let me tell you, it was a mess. People were fascinated and yet horrified by the idea of a child killer, like perhaps you watching this video. The prosecution argued that Mary was fully aware of what she was doing and that her actions were deliberate and calculated. But the defense claimed that Mary suffered from a personality disorder and lacked the emotional capacity to understand the full extent of her crimes. Plus, this was a time when people didn't really know what to make of child criminals. She was evil, or she was just a product of her environment. I guess we still kind of don't know that. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think in the comments? In the end, Mary was convicted of manslaughter, not murder, because the jury accepted that she was suffering from a psychopathic disorder. Mary Bell was sentenced and detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which again is British for possibly forever. Now imagine that, being 11 years old and sentenced to who knows how many years behind bars. So what happened to Mary after all of this? Well, she served 12 years in various institutions before being released in 1980 at the age of 23. And get this, when she was released, she was given a new identity to protect her from the public. I mean, can you really blame them? A child killer out in the world with her real name? Yeah, that would have been a media frenzy. But that's not quite where the story ends. In 1998, Mary Bell co-authored a book with a journalist, Gita Sereni, titled Cries Unheard: The Story of Mary Bell. In it, she gives her story of the murders and blames much of her actions on the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother, which I told you at the beginning. The book was met with outrage from the families of her victims, and understandably so. Now, this mobster hitman supposedly killed 100 to 200 people. Whoa. It doesn't stop there. He even killed a kid and put him in a damn steel drum. When it comes to mobsters, Giovanni Brusca isn't your everyday thug. Nah, this guy was something entirely different. An absolute monster. Let's rewind a little bit. Brusca was born into the mafia family life in Sicily on February 20th, 1957. And I literally mean born into it. His father, Bernardo Brusca, was a notorious mafia boss. Talk about the family business, huh? Brusca was to follow in his father's footsteps, growing up on a code of silence, loyalty, and murder, of course. By the time he was 22, Giovanni was already, deep in. We're talking full-on mob boss mode. Running operations, calling hits, breaking legs, shooting people who disrespect the family, you know. Ever see a movie where there's a montage of a dude learning how to do bad stuff while he's making a bunch of money? Yeah, basically that. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Oh, I forgot to mention that Brusca's nickname was the
Pig. Yes, his nickname is The Pig. Now you're probably wondering why. It was actually because he was pudgy and looked gross, and was also known for his brutality and greed. Charming guy, am I right? He became a member of the Corleonesi faction, which, by the way, was the most ruthless group in the mafia, led by the infamous mafia boss, Salvatore Totorina. I mean, seriously, these guys didn't flinch at killing someone just for looking at them wrong, taking "yeah, I'm walking here" to a whole new level. But in the world of organized crime, being a mobster isn't just about power or breaking legs. I mean, that's great and whatnot, but it's about making some goddamn statements. Like these dudes with Tommy guns would shoot the name of their gang into a wall just so they could announce who robbed the bank. I mean, those kind of statements aren't like too bad, right? So let's talk about what happened in 1983, when this man orchestrated the assassination of Judge Rocco Cinici, who had the bad idea of looking into the mafia. Without anyone seeing, he finds Cinici's car, and with not a care in the world for who else might, get in the car, he set it off to explode when he turned on the car. Cinici gets in like any other day. Bang! That car bomb killed Cinici and 3 others who had nothing to do with the mafia at all. Yeah, kind of delightful, wouldn't you agree, little boxhead? But his biggest statement of all came in 1992. Giovanni Falcone, a different guy than our main man Giovanni, by the way, was a man dedicated to bringing down the mafia. Pleasant idea. And was a hero to many who didn't want to live under the rule of the mafia, who I'm sure you can imagine was, most people. Falcone was kind of Brusca's archenemy. Brusca pulled off the murder of Falcone in a way straight out of an action movie. What did he do? He planted half a ton of explosives under a highway near Capaci, knowing exactly when Falcone's convoy would pass. He waited patiently for the lawyer to arrive, watching and waiting for his moment. The convoy got closer. Right as the car went over the marked spot, he smirked and pushed the detonator. Kaboom! The explosion was so massive, it created a crater and instantly killed Falcone. Not only that, but it killed his wife and his 3 bodyguards. Body parts laid all over the road, and Brusca ran off into the night. But wait, hold on, it doesn't stop there. Brusca did something else that was so disgusting it might get this video taken down. Yeah, it's that bad. So there was this mafia informant. Wait, for those who don't know, an informant is someone who basically snitches to the cops. Yeah, okay, so here's the backstory. In 1993, Brusca was responsible for kidnapping an 11-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo. I hope I'm saying that right. The son of Santino Di Matteo. Yeah, so basically, Brusca and his men held this kid hostage, moving him from one safe house to another for over 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. The kid was a teenager by the time he was, well, we'll get into that. All in an attempt to force Santino to take back his statements against the mafia. It's kind of unclear what he was going to say about the mafia, but I'm sure it wasn't about the mafia being, good guys or anything, or about a parking ticket they missed. So then they proceed to unalive him after holding the kid for 2 years. But then yet, it somehow still gets worse. Giovanni took his body and literally, hold on, let me say this to you, dissolved it in acid. It was a clear message. Never betray the goddamn mafia. No one, not even Boxhead subscribers are safe. Subscribe. Okay, after orchestrating the murders of people like the lawyer from earlier, Giovanni Falcone, and the horrifying kidnapping and murder of the informant's son, Brusca became one of the authorities' most wanted men in Italy. Who would have guessed? So, like you would expect, the Italian police, for those who don't know, their wacko version of the FBI called the... Carabinieri. Think of them as sort of anti-mafia units who were all on high alert. Oh, and high alert they were. They were hunting him for years on end, following leads, intercepting communications, and piecing together any information they could find. Sounds like a movie, am I right? Well, the problem was there wasn't any evidence at all. He kept vanishing without a trace. Aside from the bodies Giovanni was leaving, that was it. Let's just say Brusca didn't exactly make it easy for them. So in his time, he was moving from hideout to hideout, never staying at one place for too long. and the mafia network was vast. And our main man, Giovanni Brusca, had plenty of loyalists willing to protect his dumbass. I mean, when you have that kind of power and fear is on your side, it's almost like you're untouchable. Now imagine that, a man constantly on the move, always looking over his shoulder. He wasn't just hiding in caves or abandoned buildings either. No. Brusca had access to safe houses equipped with all sorts of comforts that the piggy needed across Italy. He was really funded with this pig-like wealth. But even the most careful criminals make their mistakes, and usually make it into a box set video. The breakthrough in the hunt for Brusca came in kind of an ironic source. The authorities received a tip from someone who had grown tired of living under the mafia's shadow, and wanted the hell out. They wished to remain anonymous, and I mean, I would too. So here's what happened next. Well, the police acted really quick, setting up surveillance and preparing for a swift operation. Hold on though, boxheads, they had to be careful. Our piggy Brusca was known to be heavily guarded, and any misstep on their end could end in a full-on shootout. So, on May 20th, 1996, the Italian authorities moved in on a safe house outside of Cannatello, a small town in Sicily, by the way. They approached the house. They saw him through his giant window in the backyard. There he was. Our guy Brusca was hiding with chip crumbs probably on his fat-ass belly, with his brother Vincenzo and some, bodyguards. Per usual. The police then surrounded the area, cutting off literally any possible escape route. It was a high-stakes operation. And not only did they have to move fast to catch Brusca, but they had to catch him off guard. The police stormed the house, guns drawn, go! Adrenaline pumping. They broke down the door and cleared the safe house room by room.
Clear! Boxhead! This is Boxhead! Clear! Move!
Brusca and his men tried to resist and grab the guns to fight back, but they were quickly overpowered. Yeah, sounds just like Scarface without a grenade launcher, am I right? After years of evading capture, the pig was finally in custody. I guess he really porked this one up, huh? But wait, hold on, it doesn't stop there. Brusca's capture was more than just catching one guy. It was a gold mine of information. The authorities found documents, weapons, and other materials that provided valuable insights into the mafia's operations, like how these guys would dispose of bodies. And honestly, this was kind of the beginning of the end for the mafia, because ever since these arrests, they've never been as powerful. Oh yeah, remember how you were never supposed to betray the mafia? Well, Brusca eventually turned into an informant. He realized that cooperating with the authorities could reduce his sentence, which at first was going to be multiple life sentences, down to just a couple decades. And they provided some level of protection from the mafia's wrath. Yeah, the big bad wolf decided to squeal. I mean, wouldn't you if it meant that you could get out of jail one day? Remember, this is the same guy that killed a kid and put him in a damn steel drum. His decision to collaborate was a complete game changer. He sat around living comfortably in a nicer jail cell that they made more comfortable than the rest of the inmates. And in return, he offered details into the mafia's operations. So his cooperation led to the charging of Salvatore Totorina, the leader of their group we mentioned earlier, with the orchestrating of the murders, along with a bunch of low-level guys in the mafia. This significantly weakened the organization. But becoming a little tattletale wasn't a great thing either. Many Italians felt that his crimes were too awful to be forgiven, regardless of his cooperation. And Brusca's own life in prison was marked by isolation and constant threat. Oh, did you really think this had some sort of happy ending or something? They ended up releasing him in 2021 after many appeals and because of his cooperation, of course. Yeah, this dude right here is back on the street today. Let's just say I won't be seeing Sicily anytime soon. Alright, now let's talk about Richard Kuklinski, a guy so scary he had the nickname of the Iceman. Chilling, am I right? Yeah, my humor is just broken. Born on April 11th, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey, our guy Richard didn't have an easy start. His father, Stanley, was a violent alcoholic, and his mother, Anna, wasn't much better. She was strict and oftentimes abusive. Growing up in such a harsh environment shaped Richard into a tough and just angry young man. It was said his first kill was a bully at 13 years old. Now all I gotta say is I wasn't killing nobody back when I was 13 years old. Imagine being a young boy trying to navigate life with a father who, slaps him very, very hard. and a mother who uses broom handles as weapons. That right there was Richard's whole childhood. And one day, after his father had a little bit too much to drink, he, this is just messed up, actually beat his own son to death and had his entire family lie about it to avoid getting in trouble. This was Richard's brother, by the way. Now let's fast forward to the 1950s. Richard is now a grown man, trying to make a living doing whatever would pay. Evidently, he was actually a truck driver in New Jersey. Come on, man, he was getting paid a little bit good. But the money wasn't good enough. He was bottling rage from his childhood. He started off with petty crimes, but soon enough, his violence got him working for dangerous people. He became the guy they would send in to collect money or settle disputes with a little bit of muscle. But his big break came when he started working as a hitman for the mafia. Well, working for the mafia is where he started to really make a name for himself. Now, why was our guy Richard called the Iceman? Great question. Richard got this nickname because he had a very unique way of hiding his crimes. He would freeze the bodies of his victims to confuse the police about the time of their death. Okay. Imagine putting leftovers in the freezer to keep them from spoiling. Richard did that with bodies, which obviously, like I mentioned before, made it hard for investigators to find out when a person was killed. One of his first known victims was George Mollyband. So here's how the story goes. Mollyband was trying to buy tapes off of Richard, but instead, he ended up in a 55-gallon oil drum near a chemical plant. Richard shot him 5 times and stuffed his body into the drum, but not before cutting the tendons in his leg to make him fit. Yucky, man. That's the type of stuff that, makes me squirm thinking about it. Despite his gruesome killings and job, I guess you could say, Richard lived a seemingly normal life. After a long, hard day of chopping up people and freezing their corpses, he'd sit down for a nice wine with his wife Barbara in the suburbs. Imagine a typical suburban dad, mowing the lawn, playing with his kids, and attending neighborhood barbecues. That was Richard. Or at least, that's what his family and neighbors thought he was. They had no clue about his side hustle. His wife noticed that he was always kind of like a bit off. Barbara knew Richard had a temper, but she didn't have a clue how much worse it got. She believed he was just a successful business guy. Isn't it kind of scary that you could live with someone and completely not know who they are? This is the type of stuff that makes me think that banging the secretary is fine. I might have to have a talk with my wife. Even when he'd leave the house in the middle of night, she didn't ask any questions. They lived by the don't ask, don't tell philosophy. Sounds like a great marriage. And because of this, Richard's list of victims grew over the years. There was Paul Hoffman, a pharmacist who hoped to make a quick buck by buying stolen street pharmacy items. I think you know what I mean by street pharmacy. And so Richard lured him into a garage and attacked him until he was, dead. And get this, the weapon? A tire iron. Yeah, a tire iron. Then there was Gary Smith, a member of the same gang who started talking about quitting. Richard, of course, feared that he might become an informant, so he poisoned him with cyanide-laced hamburgers. Boy, our guy Richard's a ham sandwich. Oh, he didn't just stop there. Another gang member, Daniel Deppner. Richard killed him in an apartment for a similar reason. This seems like a really dangerous line of work, huh? Well, anyway, Richard wrapped his body in garbage bags and dumped it in you guessed it, a wooded area. It was found by someone riding their bike and it was surrounded by vultures. One of his most notable victims was Louis Masgay, whose body was found in a park with a bullet hole in his head. Richard, of course, had frozen the body, and when it thawed, the police found icicles inside of the goddamn corpse, making determining the time of death very hard, of course. This trick right here earned him his very chilling nickname. Nope, not the time. By the mid-1980s, Richard's activities had caught the attention of law enforcement. Remember, this dude was affiliated with the mafia, a known killer, and all the authorities needed now was some sort of concrete evidence to slam the guy. So they set up a task force called Operation Iceman to catch him, which had members from all the alphabet boys. ATF, FBI. I'm sure they even had called the CIA, who were probably too busy torturing the homeless people with LSD. Yeah, that's a true story too. Alright, so here comes Dominique Palifrone, an ATF agent who went undercover to befriend Richard. Yeah, this guy had to play house and pretend to be this guy's friend. For 18 months, Palifrone posed as a fellow hitman. named Dominique Provenzano. He gained Richard's trust and got him to talk about his methods and his murders. Richard even demonstrated how he used cyanide to kill his targets. A smiling and nodding, approving friend, Polyphone listened to everything while he recorded actually everything. For personal use, of course. Damn, I wish I had that video. In December 1986, Richard was ready to do another hit. But he got suspicious when the cyanide Polyphone gave him didn't work on a stray dog that he tested on. This dude was willing to test poison on a goddamn dog. The only thing that saved the dog was the fact that the cops didn't give him real cyanide. Damn, man. Alright, people's one thing, but dogs, come on, bro. Well, Richard called off the hit and went home, but it was too late. The police had enough evidence on him. Ha! Got him, Polyphone probably said. Time to move in. The cops set up a roadblock to catch him on December 17th, 1986. And as his car approached, the cops were all nervous. What if he shot back? Could any of them be next? Sweating nervously, they waited for him to get closer. Closer. Now! Sirens blared and lights flashed and the Iceman stopped the car in shock. Iceman, get out of the vehicle and put your hands on top of the car. And, freeze. God damn it, Jerry. Anyways, Richard's trial began in 1987. And thanks to the undercover operation, there was plenty of evidence to convict him. Witnesses who had seen him being suspicious many times, possibly when he was hiding the bodies, decided to take the stand and testify against him. And eventually, the jury found him guilty of 5 murders, 4 of which he was actually convicted for. I guess the last one they didn't have enough evidence for the 5th. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole until he was over 100 years old, and we're actually going to get to that. But the story didn't end there. Richard continued to claim that he had killed many more people, anywhere from 100 all the way up to 200. Let's take a closer look at some of Richard's more insane claims. He said that he had killed Jimmy Hoffa, the former Teamsters Union president who vanished without a trace in 1975. But yeah, according to Richard, he was a part of the team that kidnapped him, where he then said he killed him and then disposed of his body in a steel drum. The drum, he claimed, was later compacted and sold as scrap metal to Japan. What they did with that after, I have no idea. However, experts were a little bit skeptical. They found no evidence to support Richard's story. An FBI agent who worked on the Hoffa case said that Richard was never a suspect. It just seemed like Richard enjoyed adding extra flair to his tales, making himself sound more dangerous and connected than he, really was. Another wild claim was that Richard fed a victim to rats in a Pennsylvania cave. He said he used to dump bodies in caves and then let the rats, do the rest. However, when investigators went to go check out these caves, they found not a single human remain or any evidence of flesh-eating rats. I think our guy Richard thinks he was living in a movie. While in prison, Richard became somewhat of a celebrity. He gave interviews to writers, criminologists, and TV producers. He was featured in several HBO documentaries where he shared details about his life and crimes. But eventually, Richard's health began to become a massive problem. In October 2005, he was diagnosed with a rare disease and was then transferred to a hospital. Despite a do not resuscitate order signed by his damn wife, which, hold on, imagine your wife signing that. Richard asked his doctors to revive him if he ever went into cardiac arrest. But on March 5th, 2006, at the age of 70, Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, died of heart disease. I hope they cremated him. That would have really thawed him out. Alright, now let's talk about Alexander Solonik, who was one of the most infamous hitmen in Russian history. He may have killed up to 200 people, and I'm seriously not even joking about that. But how does a dude go from your average Joe to a full-blown commie John Wick? Let's rewind a little bit. Alexander Solonik was born on October 16th, 1960, in Kurgan, a city in the Soviet Union. For those that don't know, that was what Russia was called before it was Russia. Growing up, he seemed like any other kid, but he had a slightly bad habit of getting into trouble. He was always caught fighting or stealing packs of gum. I mean, his crimes were about to escalate real damn quick. After finishing school, he joined the Soviet army where he got lots of training in guns and even some martial arts. Or to put it really simply, he could shoot his guns well and he could punch hard. This training made him incredibly skilled and prepared him for a life that would make him very dangerous. After leaving the army, Solonik tried to have a normal life. He worked as a firefighter and then as a police officer. But his temper and using violence to solve problems got him into a lot of trouble. Oh no, seriously, he was fired from being a firefighter and a police officer. So, with no job, he used his military skills to turn to crime. Sounds like a freaking action movie to me. He got his start with some petty crimes, gaining some connections in the crime world. But Solenik's big break came when he was introduced to just who he needed. The goddamn Russian mafia who he started working for. His reputation grew so fast because he was one, efficient and ruthless. We like the way you work, kid. Take care of these guys for us and you'll be made a man. Anything for you, comrade. I don't think that's what the Russians sound like, but who knows. Anyways, he took one job after the next, and he wasn't just cleaning toilets or sweeping floors. He was killing off all of his clients' rivals. Guy going to work, bang, sniper shot. Dude scraped a mafia car, shot dead in an alley. I mean, seriously, no one was safe. He became known as one of the most dangerous hitmen in Russia, earning the nicknames Sasha the Macedonian and Alexander the Great. He was infamous for his ability to eliminate targets in broad daylight without ever getting caught. Isn't that insane? Imagine you're just walking through a park in broad daylight and bang! Shot dead and the guy just walks away. Now get this, out of all the things the authorities could have got him for, in the early 1990s, Solenik was actually arrested for illegal possession of firearms. Go figure. And of course, other crimes. He was placed in, oh, good lord, what does this say? Matroshkaya Tishina. And of course, I butchered that, but it was one of the most secure prisons in Russia. So everyone's safe now, right? Wrong. Solenik wasn't just someone who could be easily confined. You're not gonna believe this one. On July 5th, 1995, he pulled off an escape that would seriously make Houdini proud. Solenik managed to break out of prison, climbing the walls and escaping the guards. His escape was so daring and well executed that it left authorities stunned and even embarrassed. And get this, they still don't know how he did it. The main theory is that he bribed a guard to give him some tools to get out of his cell. They know he climbed the walls, so maybe his inside help gave him the rope or something, I don't know. But still, till this day, nothing was found. After his escape, Solenik fled to Greece, where he continued his criminal life. Despite being on the run, Solenik continued to take assassination contracts, working for various criminal organizations. I mean, hey, this guy was passed around. He was more so known for his high-profile hits, including the murders of prominent Russian mob bosses. Despite his success, if you can even call it that, Solenik's life of running couldn't last forever. The authorities both in Russia and internationally were determined to catch this man. And on February 2nd, 1997, his body was found in a rented villa in Athens, Greece. He had been strangled to death. And the best part is no one knows what happened. It was widely believed that Solenik was killed by criminals on orders from the Russian mafia, who saw him as too much of a threat after he killed many of their own guys. Alright, now let's talk about Roy DeMeo. Roy was one of the most feared and ruthless members of the Gambino crime family. If you don't know who that is, just imagine the guys John Wick goes after. Well, this one was no spy, but he was one of the worst hitmen to ever live. His name was Roy Albert DeMeo, born on September 7th, 1940, in Brooklyn, New York. He grew up in a tough neighborhood where survival often meant getting his hands a little bit dirty. Or bloody, kind of depends on the day. As a young man, Roy was smart, but he chose a different path. Instead of going to college or getting a regular job, he got involved in the great world of crime. And Roy's choices led him straight into the arms of the mafia. Okay, this part is really cool. Like, I'm actually kind of giddy, like, waiting to tell you this. This mafia boss was in the same high school graduating class as Bernie Sanders. I'm serious, these two could have really hung out together. Anyways, in the 1960s, Roy started out as a loan shark, lending money at high interest rates to people who were down on their luck. And yeah, the interest rates from mobsters usually involved broken legs if not paid. And oh guys, he did way more than just breaking legs. But Roy wasn't just about making money. He was more about making a name for himself. His use of violence to collect debt actually got the attention of higher-ups in that Gambino family we talked about earlier. Roy moved up the ranks, building a crew of loyal followers, who were, you guessed it, just as awful. They became known as the DeMeo crew. Yeah, really creative. Why can't these guys ever call themselves something cool? They just sound like aggressive plumbers. Anyways, they operated out of a bar in Brooklyn called the Gemini Lounge. Think of that place in SpongeBob where the fish eats nails for breakfast without any milk. That was basically the Gemini Lounge. The DeMeo crew became famous for their method of disposing bodies, known as the Gemini method. Okay. Here's how it worked. They would lure their victim into the back room of the lounge, where one of the crew would shoot them in the head with a silenced pistol. Another crew member would then immediately wrap the victim's head in a towel to, prevent the blood from spilling everywhere. Just less evidence to clean up. Well, hold on, it gets worse. Then they would drain the body of blood in a bathtub and then dismember it, wrapping up the dismembered parts of the human in plastic bags. Wait, guys, was the show Dexter based on the DeMeo crew? Food for thought, as they would say. Anyways, they would then dump the remains in various locations around Brooklyn. And by the way, when it came to his hits, Roy DeMeo didn't hesitate to kill, whether it was to settle a score, send a message, or eliminate a potential threat. He and his crew were responsible for over 100 murders, with some estimates even going as high as 200. And let's actually get into some of the murders. One of Roy's early victims was a car thief who had made the mistake of stealing from the mafia. Yeah, not a great idea. Well, Roy took him to the Gemini Lounge and brought him to the back with promises of dancers and probably that blowy blow. But instead got a blow right to his head. Now you're probably wondering, how could he have been doing all of this with no one suspecting a damn thing? Well, Roy lived a normal life at home. He was a family man with wife and kids, little box heads running around, living in a comfortable suburban home on Long Island. Roy's work for the Gambinos wasn't just murder, but also stealing cars, street pharmacy trafficking, and he even got involved in the illegal Mia Khalifa type adult business. In the 1980s, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies began cracking down on the mafia. They started building cases against mobsters, and Roy DeMeo was high up on their list. The large number of murders he was involved in made him a prime target for the cops. But it wasn't just the police that Roy had to be worried about. Within the mafia, the bosses were getting nervous about how much attention Roy's crew, was attracting. They feared he might flip and become an informant to save himself and his crew before he got caught. So you can probably guess what happened. In 1983, Roy DeMeo's luck ran out. The Gambino family decided he was too much of a risk and needed to, eliminate the target. On January 10th, 1983, Roy went to meet up with some of his crew members, supposedly for a, business meeting. But this meeting was actually a setup. Hey buddy, old Roy. Hey, I'm walking here. Bang, bang, bang. No, I'm walking here. You spaghettied your last meatball sucker. And before you start commenting, my uncle's hamster is Italian and I'm allowed to do that accent for anyone who was thinking to comment just now. Okay, how does the story end? Well, after he had, spaghettied his last meatball, he obviously wasn't coming home. His family then reported him missing about 10 days later. Get this though, Roy's body was found in the trunk of his own car, and it's been sitting there for over a week. The mobsters who took it parked it in the lot of a marina near his damn home. And yeah, he'd been shot multiple times in the head. Cops are probably looking at the body in the trunk. Doesn't feel good, eh? Roy's dead body obviously doesn't respond. Alright. God damn it, Jerry.
Okay, let's talk about some serial killers who were never actually caught. And I think we should start off with the Freeway Phantom. Let's start off with this first victim. On the night of April 21st, 1971, the Freeway Phantom would abduct, get this, a 13-year-old girl named Carol Denise Spink. Yeah, you heard me correctly, a 13-year-old girl from a nearby 7-Eleven. Carol's sister, Valerie, gave her $5 to buy some groceries for the family and to buy some soda. Or pop for the weirdos that call it that. And when Valerie waited for her sister to return, she never actually came out of the store. Not only that, but that night, Carol never actually made it back to her family's Congress Heights apartment. So now you're probably wondering, where did she go? Well, apparently she was abducted while she was inside of the 7-Eleven, and that was the last time anyone saw Carol for the next 6 days. until her body was found 20 minutes outside of Interstate 295 and Suitland Parkway. Alright, listen, this is where things get a little bit disgusting. Because the freeway phantom kept her alive for multiple days so that he could assault her, you know, sexually through her. I'm not saying that. Just keep in mind she's only 13 years old, and it doesn't stop there. Because she was also beaten, cut across not just her face, but torso and even her arms. Then ended her life by strangling her to death. You'll see why that part is so important in connecting all these different murders. Now, the freeway phantom's next victim literally came from the same damn neighborhood as Carol. Yep, this guy definitely had a specific hunting ground. Alright, but this time the victim was a 16-year-old girl. Yeah, what the hell. This next victim is Darlena Johnson, who was abducted on the 8th of July in 1971, so it's 3 months after Carol. Except this time though, the girl wasn't abducted at a 7-Eleven. Instead, Darlena was headed to work as a summer camp counselor at the Oxon Hill Recreation Center, when an eyewitness claimed that she saw Darlena riding with an older black man in a slightly beaten up car. And now, do you remember that disturbing pattern I was talking about earlier and asked you to remember? Well, get ready, because Darlena's body was found 4.6 meters, or for you nerds watching this, 15 feet away from the same exact spot Carol's body was found. Now, you're probably wondering how this guy wasn't caught if he was finding the girls from the same neighborhood and throwing them away in the same damn place. Hold on, I'll get to that, but let me tell you what he did to Darlena. It's not really clear whether the body was touched in a inappropriate way, but we do know that Darlena was strangled to death just like Carol. I mean, are we starting to see a signature? Maybe this next victim will make it really clear for you guys. Just get ready. This is 10-year-old Brenda Crockett, who was discovered on the 28th of July near an underpass on US Highway 50. And you guessed it, Brenda had been strangled to death. But just like Carol, she was also abducted while walking into a grocery store. This dude might not like shopping or something, honestly. Following the brutal kidnapping of Brenda, 12-year-old Nanomasia Yates was abducted on October 1st, with their body being found, get this, 6 days later. Sounds awfully familiar, right? Yeah, and here's another shocker. She was also strangled to death. Now here's where the ritual actually changed. When the freeway killer killed his oldest victim, can anyone guess how old she was? Nope, you got it wrong. She was only 18 years old. Brenda Denise Woodard was kidnapped from a bus stop on November the 15th, stabbed multiple times, and then literally thrown away like trash. But like I said, here's where things get exciting about this kill. Can I even say exciting? Anyways, the freeway phantom actually left a note on the scene for the cops, which went something like, actually, wait, hold on, let me get the exact words for you. This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. I mean, this guy was just poking fun at the police, like he knew he was gonna get away with it. Before I tell you how the freeway phantom escaped the cops, let me tell you a bit about his final victim. 17-year-old Diane Williams one day went missing after boarding a bus. So avoid buses and shops. Nice, I guess you literally couldn't go anywhere. Diane's body was found along I-295 in Philadelphia, where once again she was strangled to death. Shocker. But also she was found just 5 miles out from where Carol Spinks was also previously found. So let's review this for a second. The bodies were strangled, taken from similar places, and dumped in the same area, and the cops would not find anything? I mean, this guy literally killed 6 different people with the most obvious patterns. Well, folks, the police didn't devote any serious resources towards catching this killer. I mean, sure, maybe they questioned a few people, but after a while, they kind of just stopped. And ladies and gentlemen, we are just getting started, because that's not the only serial killer that got away with multiple murders. Okay, now let's look at the I-70 killer who may have gotten away with the most amount of kills on this list. But first, let me give you a bit of context. And I'm already gonna assume that you guys know that I-70 is that huge road that goes from Baltimore all the way to Utah. So let's just get into like the main part of all this. The first victim taken by the I-70 killer was a shoe store clerk by the name of Robin Fuldauer. 3 days later, on the 11th of April, the same killer would enter a bridal store in Wichita, Kansas, and force 2 employees, Patricia Majors and Patricia Smith, into the back room of the store before shooting them both dead on the spot. Now you're probably wondering, how is this guy walking into stores, killing people, and then getting away with it without anyone seeing? Well, during the murders of both the Patricias, a customer actually walked into the store while the I-70 killer was wrapping things up. What I found kinda strange here while researching this part was the I-70 killer actually let the customer live, even though the killer could have been identified. Soon after, the life of Nancy Kitzmiller was taken in a store in St. Charles, Missouri. Now here's something you might find interesting. In 1992, on May 7th, Sarah Blessing was shot dead at a gift store in broad daylight at a strip mall in Missouri in a specific city named Raytown. Except this time, there were eyewitnesses who got a glimpse of the killer as he was trying to flee the scene. And the description actually matched perfectly with the description of the killer from the store customer in Wichita. Let me actually show you the police sketches. Well, it gets better. The lab test confirmed that all 5 victims have been killed by the same gun, a semi-automatic 22 caliber pistol for anyone that was curious. Oh wait, I've also got this gun linked to a murder of a 40-year-old man in Indiana by the name of Michael McCown. So now that puts us at 6 victims. Anyways, this is where the story gets a bit confusing. Okay, so make sure you're following. Given how quickly these murders came to a total stop, it was suspected that the I-70 killer was arrested for a totally different crime. No one knows what the crimes were or if this theory was even true. But our boy was back because in 1993 and in 1994, 1 to 2 years after the last confirmed kill, there were 3 more killings that followed the same I-70 killer pattern, which started to make the police wonder if this guy was still out and about or if we had a copycat on our hands. Till this day, we still don't know who this killer was or if he's still out and about because the cops kind of let this case turn cold. I mean, all they had to do was think a little bit outside of the box. Kind of like my head. Alright, in all seriousness, join the rest of the 4,100 of us and hit the subscribe button. But anyways, I love this next case because the killer got away with over 8 murders just because of his skin color. Yeah, let me tell you about the Frankfurt slasher who basically terrorized a single neighborhood in Philadelphia for 5 straight years. The years 1985 to 1990 for anyone that was curious. And some of you were probably alive for this. The first victim was 52-year-old Helen Patent, who was found dumped in a railway maintenance yard. And it was later revealed that she was assaulted, sexually, as well as being stabbed 19 times. Yeah, you heard me correctly, 19 damn times. Oh, and she was also found fully nude from the waist down and had her blouse pushed all the way up to expose her chest. Which I'm obviously not going to show you guys or draw because, I kind of like being able to post on YouTube. Anyways, 5 months after the murder of Helen, this 60-year-old woman named Anna Carroll was found stabbed to death in her own apartment. And as you could probably guess, she was also fully nude from the waist down and even had her blouse pulled all the way up. Let's just say this guy's signature was a tad bit strange. And over the following few years, the Frankfurt slasher was thought to have been responsible for around 6 more murders on women. And the cops had nothing on this guy is probably what you're thinking. Well, the cops actually had a lead. So the victims were actually seen with an unidentified middle-aged white man shortly before all of their deaths. Great. The potential description for the Frankfurt slasher could have been half of goddamn America. But here's where the story starts to take a bit of a turn. The slasher murdered another person, 46-year-old Carol Dowd, behind a fish market in 1990, and authorities finally had a suspect that could be the Frankfurt slasher. The suspect was Leonard Christopher, and why did they think he was the Frankfurt slasher? Because he was one of the employees at the fish market that was working at the same time of the murder. Surprisingly, he was actually found guilty for the murder. By the way, the signature of the murder was the exact same as all the other victims earlier. So why am I talking about him in this video? It sounds like the Frankfurt slasher was caught. Well, if you don't remember, this doesn't exactly match up with the middle-aged white man that was spotted with all the other victims. Yeah, you dumb boxhead. This could have just, been a coincidence and someone probably got the description wrong. Well, buddy, listen to this. The real Frankfurt slasher murdered another woman when Christopher was still locked up. The most messed up part about all this was the case was actually forgotten about. Wait until you hear this next one, because there was a time from 1978 to 1986 where the bodies of 7 women were found in the Connecticut River Valley and basically no one cared at all. Hold on, you could probably guess what the killer's name was. Yup, the Connecticut River Valley Killer, which I can't lie is probably the worst name we've had in this video. But anyways, let's get to the juicy, super gut-wrenching stuff. All of the killings started on October 24th, 1978. Basically, a 27-year-old Kathy Milliken had left work for the day when she then made her way over to the Chandler Brook Wetland Preserve to get this, photograph some birds. Sounds like a pretty normal day, right? Well, the next day she was found literally where she was last seen, except this time she was found with 20 stab wounds. Yep, she was stabbed 20 times and no one saw a goddamn thing. And what's crazy is that a similar event went down 3 years later with the disappearance of 37-year-old Mary Elizabeth Critchley, who was dropped off by a friend one day to hike near an exit on Interstate 91. When the next time her friend saw her, it was 2 weeks later when the body was found in a wooded area, dead. Wanna know a fun fact? The body was found just a few miles out from where Kathy's body was found 3 years prior. Next, we have 17-year-old Bernice Kuftamash, who was last seen in New Hampshire hitchhiking to her boyfriend's house. Oh, and I forgot to mention it was the year 1984. Anyways, when Bernice didn't arrive at her boyfriend's house, she was reported missing and finally found 2 years later by a fisherman. The problem here was it was just her remains. That same year, 26-year-old Ellen Ruth Freed was in the area at 2 a.m. on a payphone to her sister after she was telling her that there was a suspicious car going back and forth around her. That next day, she failed to show up to work and her remains were found about a year later, around 8 miles out from where she was last seen. But this next murder was actually the really important one. So listen up. Once again, it's 1986 and Linda Moore was doing yard work alone at her home when her husband returned from work and he was met with his wife being stabbed 25 times on the living room floor. But the murder of Linda was really important to this case because there was actually an eyewitness that was able to describe the appearance of the Connecticut River Valley Killer. Apparently, he was a man in his 20s, rounded face, glasses, and dark hair. Oh, and the reason people were able to identify him was because he was lurking around Linda's home literally hours before the attack. Somehow, this was the closest anyone's ever got to the Connecticut River Valley Killer alive. Until the year 1988. Basically, 22-year-old Jane Borowski was in New Hampshire for a county fair, when after leaving the fair, she ended up stopping to purchase a drink from a convenience store. I should also mention that she parked next to a Jeep in the parking lot. This part is really important, trust me. When the store was closed, she settled for some soda or pop from a nearby vending machine. Oh, and I forgot to mention that she was also 7 months pregnant at this time too. Random side fact. Alright, here's where the fun begins. So when she got back to her car, the driver from the Jeep next to her then got out, opened Jane's door, then dragged the pregnant woman and started beating and stabbing her. She was actually stabbed a total of 27 times. And get this, she survived. Yep, you heard me correctly. Alright, this is where the Connecticut River Valley Killer actually messed up. Because after the attacker fled, Jane got in her car and tried to drive off to find some help, when she realized that she was driving directly behind her attacker's car. I mean, could you just imagine that? I mean, I wonder if the killer knew she was behind him. Anyways, this left her with a pretty good description of the vehicle and her attacker itself, which she later gave to the police after escaping to a friend's house and receiving proper medical attention for the stabs. Jane then identified her attacker as Vietnam veteran named Michael Nicolou, who became a suspect originally in 1988 after his wife would suddenly disappear. So if they knew the man that killed all these people, how did he escape? Well, that's because in 2005, Michael murdered his new wife and stepdaughter before taking his own life. And guys, get this, the cops have yet to confirm if he was really the Connecticut River Valley Killer, which is why law enforcement believe he could still be out in the wild.